My name is Estelle Hammond, and I'm 74 years old. I've been a widow for 29 years, a mother of 3, and a grandmother of 5. I spent my entire adult life pouring everything I had, my time, my energy, my savings, into my family. I thought that counted for something. I thought love, sacrifice, and devotion would be returned in kind. I was wrong. It happened on a chilly March morning in Silver Falls, Oregon, where I've lived for most of my life. The mailbox held a single envelope with my name typed neatly on the front. No return address.
No stamp.
At first, I thought it was a birthday card, maybe from one of the kids who always forgot to call on time but remembered to send something late. I smiled to myself and tore it open at the kitchen table, with a cup of lukewarm tea. Inside wasn't a card. It was an invoice. A bill. For rent. Rent. For staying in my own house. The house my late husband Carlton and I built from the ground up when I was 35 and he was 38. A modest 2-story with yellow shutters and a wraparound porch. Carlton was a carpenter. And every corner of this house bears his fingerprints. He laid the floors himself. I painted every room. Together, we made it into a home, a haven, for our 3 children, Marcus, Lena, and Dylan. I remember the first night we slept here, surrounded by paint cans and pizza boxes. I remember the sound of baby feet on hardwood, bedtime stories whispered under quilts, and holiday dinners where laughter bounced off the walls like music. And now, decades later, my own son was charging me to live here. The bill was typed professionally, with a logo at the top. Hammond Family Holdings. It included backdated charges for shared utilities, household contributions, and God help me, occupancy. $5,100 total. Due in 14 days. First, I thought it was a mistake, a clerical error, a joke. I called Marcus, my eldest, whose name had been on most of my recent financial documents. His wife Lindsay answered.
Oh, y está ya.
She chirped like nothing was wrong. You got it. We weren't sure how to bring it up. Times are tight and well, it's only fair. Fair. That word tasted like rust in my mouth. Lindsay, who wore $300 shoes while borrowing grocery money from me, who never cooked a meal that didn't come from a box, who had the gall to roll her eyes at the hand-sewn quilts I made for the grandkids, she was talking to me about fairness. I asked to speak with Marcus. She laughed. He's tied up with work. Just read the letter. We're all adults here. I stared at the invoice again, my fingers trembling. The numbers blurred. All I could think about was everything I'd given up for them. Carlton and I never took vacations. I skipped promotions to be there after school. We drained our savings to send them to college. I cooked, cleaned, supported, listened, advised. I was their safety net, their biggest fan, their warm meal on a cold night. And now they wanted rent. From me. That night. I sat alone in the living room with Carlton's old flannel wrapped around my shoulders. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat stunned, staring at the walls we painted together. The fireplace where we had slow danced on our 20th anniversary. The stairs where Lena fell and split her lip when she was 6. All of it still mine, but suddenly not. Because I realized something I had never dared to consider. They didn't see me anymore. Not as a mother. Not as a person. I was just a cost. But they made one mistake. They underestimated me. You see, when Carlton passed, suddenly at 45 from a heart attack, we had just finished paying off the house. In the early years, we had purchased a tiny duplex outside Portland as a backup investment. We'd kept it in a trust under my name only, partly for legal reasons, partly because Carlton always said, just in case, love. That duplex had been quietly renting out for years, generating income one rarely touched. I lived modestly. I clipped coupons. I reused Ziploc bags. But I had options. And now, I was going to use them. Because what Marcus and Lindsay didn't know was this. They couldn't evict me from a home I still legally owned through the trust Carlton and I created. They had tricked me into signing temporary transfer documents under the guise of helping me manage property taxes and insurance. But I never signed the final ownership papers. I knew enough to keep one foot on the ground. So while they thought they were preparing to shove me out, I was already preparing to fight. Still, I needed proof. And so I began collecting it. Every dismissive comment Lindsay made. Every invoice, every guilt-laced text, every moment of exclusion. I saved it. I started journaling each day, noting who said what, who didn't invite me to dinner, who asked for more money without a thank you. Because I knew what they were doing wasn't just unkind. It was abuse. Not the kind that leaves bruises. The kind that erodes your sense of self until you forget you ever had a voice. But I hadn't forgotten. I called a lawyer, Vanessa Shore, a bright and determined attorney who specialized in elder rights and financial exploitation. When I told her what had happened, she listened carefully, then leaned forward and said, "Mrs. Hammond, you are not powerless. You are the legal trustee of this property. They can't do a thing without you." And just like that, something inside me shifted. I wasn't the burden. I wasn't the guest. I was still the homeowner. And I had been silent long enough. For the next few weeks, I played the role they expected me to. Quiet, compliant, harmless. I still swept the kitchen floors. Still folded the towels Lindsay left in the dryer. Still said good morning, even when no one responded. But every time they looked past me, every time they spoke about me like I wasn't in the room, I added another line to the notebook I kept tucked in my nightstand. Vanessa, my attorney, taught me how to build a case not with anger, but with facts. So I did exactly that. I documented every bank transaction Marcus had made under the joint account he once convinced me to open for emergencies. I printed every digital receipt Lindsay forwarded for shared groceries that included spa treatments and takeout from restaurants I'd never set foot in. And I recorded the moment, 3 weeks after the rent invoice, when Lindsay told the children not to bother Grandma, because she doesn't understand adult things anymore. I understood perfectly. And now, I understood that I had raised a man who believed entitlement was love, and married a woman who mistook silence for consent. The final straw came on a Sunday morning in May. The house was bustling with noise, Marcus's voice booming from the backyard, Lindsay arranging party favors on the dining table, and the scent of catered food wafting from aluminum trays I hadn't been asked to help prepare. That day was Alyssa's bridal shower. My granddaughter, my sweet girl, who used to braid my hair when she was 5 and whisper secrets into my sweater. And I hadn't been invited. Not officially. Not even a mention. I was told the shower would be mostly friends. And that I'd be more comfortable upstairs. That morning, as I made my way downstairs, I saw Lindsay standing at the foot of the stairs, arms folded. "Oh, Estelle," she said, lips tight. "We're kind of at capacity in the kitchen. Why don't you take some tea to your room and relax? You can see Alyssa after, when it's less chaotic." And then she reached past me and locked the hallway door that led to the main floor. They had locked me in my own home. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding, not from shock, but from a calm I hadn't felt in years. I knew what I had to do. The door unlocked 2 hours later. I didn't say a word. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I dressed in a powder blue blouse Carlton once loved, opened the drawer where I had carefully stored the legal packet Vanessa had prepared, and walked down the stairs with the quiet force of a woman who had finally decided to stop shrinking. The party was in full swing. Pink streamers hung from the light fixtures, glasses clinked, and laughter bubbled over small talk. Alyssa stood by the fireplace, radiant and kind, her smile faltering just slightly when she saw me. But Marcus and Lindsay didn't notice me at all. Until I walked directly to the center of the living room, set the envelope down on the coffee table, and said loudly, "I hope everyone's enjoying the house. Because after today, some of you won't be living in it." The room went still. Lindsay blinked. "Excuse me." I turned to Marcus. "This is your formal eviction notice. Effective immediately, you and your wife have 30 days to vacate the premises." There were gasps. Someone dropped a glass. Marcus laughed nervously. "What are you talking about, Mom?" I handed him the papers. "I'm talking about the trust you forgot I still legally control. The home you claimed as yours with documents I never signed. The account you drained. The rent you charged me to live in my own bedroom." "You're not serious." "I've already contacted the county assessor," I said. "Vanessa filed the revocation this morning. Every transaction you made under my name is being audited. I may be old, Marcus, but I'm not weak. And I'm not your victim." Lindsay turned red. "You're ruining Alyssa's day." I turned to my granddaughter.
I'm sorry, sweetheart.
You didn't deserve this. But you deserve the truth. I was locked in my room during your bridal shower. Alyssa's eyes widened. What? Marcus tried to speak, but Alyssa raised a hand. Is that true? No one answered. And in that silence I saw everything begin to unravel. Not just their lies, but the illusion they had tried to spin around themselves. The narrative that painted me as forgetful, out of touch, fragile. That narrative died in that room. The next morning, Vanessa helped me file a formal complaint with Adult Protective Services and deliver a copy of the eviction notice to the courthouse. A restraining order wasn't necessary yet, but I had it drafted just in case. Over the next 3 weeks, Marcus and Lindsay tried to negotiate. I'm your son. This will ruin us. You don't want to die alone, do you? They called me cold, ungrateful, unloving. But I had finally learned the difference between being loving and being used. And I had no intention of going back. Alyssa visited 2 weeks later alone. She sat with me on the porch holding my hand. Grandma, she said softly, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I should have checked on you. I smiled. You have nothing to be sorry for. You were kind to me every day you were allowed to be. That means more than you know. She nodded, eyes misty. I canceled the bridal registry. We're keeping the wedding small. You're walking me down the aisle, if that's all right. That night, I cried for the first time in months. Not from pain, but from relief. I hadn't lost a family. I had just peeled back the part that never saw me. Marcus and Lindsay left the house in silence 30 days later. No apology. No acknowledgement. But I wasn't waiting for one. I had my home back. And even more than that, I had myself back. The house was quiet again. Not the kind of silence that feels lonely, but the kind that feels sacred. Peaceful. I could hear the creak of the floorboards Carlton installed by hand. The distant chime of the wind through the porch wind catcher Alyssa had made me in 2nd grade. For the first time in years, my home felt like mine again, not just in name, but in spirit. I had expected to feel triumphant once Marcus and Lindsay moved out, but instead I felt still. As if everything that had once felt chaotic had finally settled. The first thing I did was change the locks. Then I walked barefoot through the empty bedrooms, noting the scuff marks, the chipped paint, the spaces that had grown tired. I touched each wall as though greeting an old friend who'd been through war. This house had held me through love and grief. And now it was holding me through rebirth. The town of Silver Falls had never been flashy. That was part of its charm: tree-lined streets, quiet neighbors, the smell of wood smoke in the winter and wildflowers in the spring. But for all its charm, it wasn't immune to the silent epidemic of elder neglect. In the weeks following my very public reclamation of my home, I began receiving letters. At first, just 1 or 2, handwritten notes slipped into my mailbox or left under the front mat. Women, mostly in their 60s, 70s and beyond. One had been pressured into signing her home over to a daughter-in-law, who now barred her from having guests. Another had her savings drained by a grandson who refused to find work. One simply wrote, I thought I was alone until I heard what you did. That line stuck with me. I wasn't the only one. I was just one of the few who had chosen to speak up and act. I brought the letters to Vanessa, my attorney. She scanned through them, nodding. This is more common than people think, she said. What you're doing, bringing this into the open, it's rare. And powerful. That's when the idea began to take root. What if I didn't just take my life back? What if I helped other women take theirs back too? I decided to start something simple. Just a meeting. I asked the library if I could reserve a small reading room on a Wednesday afternoon. I printed out a few flyers. Community conversation. Protecting elders. Sharing our stories. I expected 3 people. 15 showed up. We sat in a circle on folding chairs, passing around tea and homemade cookies, and we talked. Not all at once. Not loudly. But honestly. I was too embarrassed to say anything, one woman admitted. I thought it was just me. Another nodded. They make you feel like speaking up is betrayal. But what they're doing, that's betrayal too. I left that meeting with a full heart and a burning need to do more. With Vanessa's help and Alyssa's encouragement, I began the process of creating a small nonprofit fund. We called it the Hearth Foundation, named after the symbol of warmth and safety in a home. The thing too many of us had lost to manipulation or silence. The mission was simple: provide legal support, small grants, and advocacy for elderly people being financially or emotionally exploited by their families.
No judgment. No shame.
Just truth and help. I used a portion of the rental income from the duplex Carlton and I had kept. I donated a bit of my savings. And soon other people began contributing quietly, anonymously, through letters and envelopes dropped off at the library or slid under my door. One woman enclosed a note. "I never thought I'd have a reason to stand up again. Thank you for giving me one." Alyssa became my right hand. She postponed her wedding until she felt it would be a celebration, not a performance. She helped me organize the second community meeting, then the third. Before long, we had a rotating guest speaker, a retired judge, a therapist, a social worker. And always there were stories. Painful ones. Hopeful ones. Women who had lived through decades of being talked over, dismissed, used, forgotten, and were finally realizing that their lives still mattered. That they had the right to draw lines. To say no. To be seen. One afternoon, as I was cleaning out the back closet, I found an old wooden sign Carlton had carved years ago but never hung. It read, "The backbone of the home." I smiled and nailed it above the fireplace. Not everyone in town approved of what I was doing. A few people crossed the street to avoid me at the market. One local man, whose mother had come to our meetings, cornered me in the parking lot and sneered, "You think tearing families apart is helping people?" I looked him in the eye. "No," I said calmly. "I think telling the truth saves people. And sometimes that truth tears down lies that shouldn't have been standing in the first place." He didn't reply. Spring came in soft waves. Daffodils pushed through the soil around the porch, and for the first time in years, I sat outside in the morning with my tea and just listened. Birdsong, wind, laughter from kids walking to school. There was no fear of eviction, no footsteps of someone barging in, no list of chores handed down like orders. Just life. My life. And it was enough. I didn't know what the future held. I was 74. My hands ached more than they used to. My memory flickered sometimes. But I was alive. I was useful. I was needed. Not because I gave everything away, but because I had finally chosen to give something back to myself. And that, more than anything, was what I hoped to leave behind. Not just a house, but a legacy of boundaries, of dignity, a fire that refused to die out just because the world said it should. By mid-June, the Hearth Foundation had become more than I imagined. Not because it was large, it wasn't, but because it was real, tangible. People were calling, writing, asking for help, asking how to help. Every Tuesday, I hosted an open hour at the library. Thursdays were dedicated to quiet tea gatherings at my house. Vanessa stopped by once a week to guide new cases. And Alyssa, my bright, determined granddaughter, was already drafting ideas for expanding outreach to churches and retirement homes. I'd never been busier in my life, and never felt more alive. So when the knock came on a rainy Thursday morning, I thought it was the gardener. But when I opened the door, my breath caught in my chest. It was Marcus. He looked different, thinner, older somehow. The proud shoulders I once saw in my teenage son had slumped. His eyes, usually sharp with calculation, were soft and unsure. "Hi, Mom," he said, almost too quietly to hear. I didn't speak. Just looked at him, at the son I had raised, the son who'd betrayed me, and now stood shivering under a gray sky like the boy who once ran to me after scraping his knee. "Can I come in?" he asked finally. I stepped aside slowly. I didn't know what made me do it. Habit. Maybe. Or maybe something deeper. The kind of compassion that doesn't vanish even after hurt. We sat in the living room, Carlton's favorite armchair still there, the fireplace cool but clean. Marcus didn't touch his tea. "I lost my job," he started, eyes lowered. "Lindsay and I, well, she moved back with her sister after things unraveled." I said nothing. He sighed. "I've been staying in a motel. And I know I don't deserve to be here. But I just needed to say something. Not for sympathy. For the truth." I waited. "You were right. About everything. About me. About what I let happen." That stirred something. He didn't say what I did. He said what I let happen. It was subtle, but it was honest. I didn't know how far I'd gone, he continued, voice breaking. It's like, I kept telling myself you'd always be there, so it didn't matter how I treated you. And when you didn't fight back, I thought you were fine with it. Thought I had control. He looked up. But you weren't fine. You were hurt. And I made you feel small in the one place you should have felt safe. Tears welled in his eyes. I was ashamed to come back. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't say it. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to tell you that I see it now. I see you. Silence filled the room again. He wiped his face. I heard about the foundation. Alyssa told me what you've done. It's amazing. You're amazing. Still, I didn't speak, because I was thinking of the boy I nursed through chickenpox, of the teenager who slammed his door after every curfew fight, of the grown man who asked for help with a down payment, and then used it to push me aside. And yet here he was, owning it. Not perfectly, not eloquently, but honestly. Finally I said, I don't hate you, Marcus. He looked at me stunned. But I don't trust you either. And forgiveness doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. It just means I'm not carrying the weight of your choices anymore. He nodded, eyes glassy. That's fair. I'm glad you came. I added. But rebuilding trust isn't done in a day. It's done in deeds. In how you show up when no one's watching. He exhaled, slow, heavy. I'm going to get help, he said. Counseling. I've already started, actually. And if you ever want to talk again, I'll come. When you're ready. Not before. He stood to leave. Paused at the door. Thank you for opening the door. I didn't say goodbye. I just watched him walk out into the rain. That night I sat with Alyssa on the porch, the sky still wet but calm. You let him in, she said gently. I did. Do you think he meant it? I nodded slowly. I think he's starting to. She took my hand. I'm proud of you. I smiled. Funny. I think I'm finally proud of me too. In the weeks that followed, I saw Marcus again, once at a hearth gathering, quietly helping set up chairs, not saying much. Another time at church, sitting alone near the back. He didn't push. Didn't ask for more than I could give. And slowly, something unexpected began to form. Not reconciliation, not yet. But space. Space for growth. For truth. For healing. One afternoon, as I sat filing papers in the living room, I came across Carlton's old journal, one he kept in the final years, just scribbled thoughts and notes. I flipped through the yellowed pages until one line stopped me. If one day you ever feel forgotten, I hope you remember the sound of your own voice. That's where your power lives. I closed the book and placed it gently on the shelf. That line wasn't just for me. It was for every woman who sat in silence too long. Every man who believed his age stripped him of authority. Every person who thought love meant shrinking. It was for all of us. The Hearth Foundation continued to grow. We held a town hall. We added a phone line. Even a small partnership with a local elder law clinic. But more than any program, the true power was in the stories. And mine, Estelle Hammond's story, wasn't one of rage or revenge. It was one of quiet rising, of choosing dignity over damage, of answering the door, not out of habit, but out of hope. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's just steady. One clear voice. One open door. One life reclaimed. The first time I realized the Hearth Foundation had taken on a life of its own was a Tuesday afternoon in September. I arrived at the community center expecting a small gathering, maybe 6 or 7 regulars and some tea. But the lot was full. The room buzzed with conversation. And someone had brought homemade cobblers, 4 of them. There were over 40 people seated in folding chairs. Older women and men, some holding hands, others clutching notepads or tissues. A few I'd met before. Most I hadn't. At the front of the room stood Alyssa, beaming. I hope you don't mind, she said. I listed the meeting in the community newsletter. The response was bigger than we expected. I smiled, both stunned and deeply moved. There had been a time when I thought no one would listen. Now I couldn't even find an empty seat. The topic that day was when boundaries hurt, but save you. We'd planned to take turns reading real, anonymous letters sent in by elders across the county, most detailed quiet heartbreaks. Children who only called for money, caregivers who crossed the line, families who punished their parents with silence. One man, Franklin, 81, and a retired piano teacher, stood up after a long silence. I gave up my house for my daughter after my wife passed. Thought I was doing the right thing. Now she tells me I can't have friends over. Says I make the house look old. The room murmured. But not in pity, in solidarity. I stood beside him, placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Franklin, you're not the one who should be ashamed. He nodded, eyes wet. And for the first time in years, he didn't look small. He looked seen. After the meeting, a woman named Beatrice approached me. She was soft-spoken, maybe mid-70s, with silver curls and sharp eyes. I've been watching you, she said. In a good way. She pulled a folded paper from her purse. This is a proposal. I think we should turn the hearth into more than a gathering place. I think we can create an actual network, partner with legal aid offices, nursing homes, churches. A coalition for elder justice. I blinked, stunned. Beatrice, that's incredible. I already made calls, she added with a wink. I was a union organizer back in the 70s. This isn't my first battle. We laughed together and I realized something. This wasn't just my fight anymore. This was a movement. Back home, I sat in the kitchen that night, flipping through the pages of Beatrice's draft. It had everything: resource lists, helpline numbers, funding contacts. A roadmap I never knew I needed. Carlton's flannel hung over the back of my chair like it always did. And I imagined him reading over my shoulder. You always did like the quiet ones, I whispered with a smile. I lit a candle, something I hadn't done in a while, and let myself feel the full weight and wonder of this chapter of my life. I was 74. I had no big titles, no retirement party or newspaper tribute. But I had something better. A room full of people who found their voice. And if that was all I left behind, it would be more than enough. A week later, I received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a simple note. Because of you, I told my son I would no longer be treated like a burden. He hung up on me. But I've never felt more proud. There was no name. Just initials. DC. I folded it gently and placed it in a box I now kept in my study. A box full of stories. A box full of proof that quiet courage creates ripples. One evening, Alyssa and I took a walk through the neighborhood. The sun dipped low, painting everything in gold. You know, she said softly, you've become kind of famous. I laughed. I'm not sure being the old woman who evicted her own son is the legacy I wanted. It's not just that, she said, nudging me playfully. It's the way you did it. Calm, thoughtful, with dignity. You made people feel like they had permission to be brave. I stopped walking. Do you think Marcus ever truly understood why I had to do it? Alyssa paused. I think he's trying. And sometimes, trying is the first step toward understanding. I nodded. It was enough for now. That fall, we held a community potluck. I hadn't hosted one in years. My house, once echoing with tension and whispered insults, was now filled with warmth. Folding chairs were scattered across the lawn, tables covered in homemade dishes, and music drifted from a Bluetooth speaker someone had brought. Franklin played piano from the porch. Beatrice brought bean salad. Vanessa stopped by to say a few words and share legal updates. And Alyssa, always steady, always smiling, made sure everyone felt welcome. As the sun set, people lit candles. We called it the light we keep. A small ceremony for those who had lost years to silence, to fear, to feeling small. Each person lit a candle and said one thing they had reclaimed. My voice. My space. My joy. My peace. My right to say no. When it was my turn, I held up the flame and said, my legacy. And in that moment, I felt Carlton beside me. Not in grief but in pride. Later that night, after everyone had gone and the house had settled into its soft nighttime hum, I stood at the window, looking out at the lawn scattered with candle jars and crumbs. And I whispered something I hadn't said out loud in years. Thank you, Estelle, for finally choosing you. Because sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself. Not for what you did, but for how long you waited to do it. The hearth continued to grow. We had a list of volunteers, a small team of advocates, even a modest grant proposal in the works. But no matter how big it became, I promised myself one thing. We would always begin with one chair, one voice, one truth. Because when one elder stands, others remember they can too. And that's how fires start. Not in a blaze, but in a spark. Winter came early to Silver Falls that year. By November, frost coated the edges of the porch railing, and the wind carried that sharpness that hinted snow wasn't far behind. I had always loved the quiet of this season. The way the world seemed to pause, take a breath, gather itself. Felt right. Like a mirror of my own life, calmer now but full of purpose beneath the surface. I was in the kitchen wrapping gifts for the hearth holiday drive, scarves, gloves, handwritten cards when I heard the doorbell. Through the glass I saw a young man shifting awkwardly on the porch, clutching a box. I opened the door surprised. "Hi," he said. "You're Estelle Hammond, right?" "I am." He extended the box toward me. "I'm Michael. I work at the post office. Someone left this at our back counter with your name on it. No return address." I took the package, thanked him, and closed the door, curious. It was light, wrapped in simple brown paper. I sat down at the kitchen table and gently opened it. Inside was a frame. A photograph. Me and Carlton, our arms around each other, standing on the porch of this very house, decades ago. Behind us, a much younger Marcus held a stick like a sword, laughing. I remembered that day. We just finished planting the oak tree in the yard. I stared at the photo for a long time before I noticed the note tucked behind the glass. "You gave us everything. And we forgot who you were beyond what you gave. I see it now. I hope you never forget again. My hands trembled slightly, but not from sadness. From peace. Marcus and I didn't talk every day. Sometimes weeks passed. But when we did, it was gentler. No longer built on obligation or guilt, but something closer to understanding. He'd taken a job at a local hardware store. Humble work. But honest. He said he liked it. Said it helped him feel real again. I didn't offer money. He didn't ask. We were rebuilding from scraps. But even scraps can make a quilt when stitched with care. At the hearth we prepared for our biggest event yet. A town-wide forum called Aging with Dignity, reclaiming the narrative. We partnered with the senior center, the local paper, even a nearby university sociology department. Beatrice led the planning. Vanessa secured guest speakers. Alyssa, bless her, coordinated every chair, every table, every tiny detail. When the day came, the community hall was full, standing room only. I stood at the back for a long time watching elders speak, share, question. Franklin played the piano during intermission. Beatrice gave a fiery speech that got a standing ovation. And when it was my turn, I walked up to the small wooden podium, hands steady. I was never meant to be a leader, I began. Just a mother. A wife. A woman with good intentions. But one day, I woke up and realized that good intentions don't protect you from being erased. The room went still. I spent my life believing that if I just gave enough, loved enough, endured enough, I'd be valued. But I learned far too late that people don't always love who you are. Sometimes they only love what you give. I paused. And that's not love at all. A murmur of agreement moved through the room like a wave. So I started saying no. Not to love, but to being used in its name. And the moment I said no was the moment I remembered I still had a life to live. I looked out across the faces, wrinkled, wise, wounded, resilient. I want you to remember this. You are not selfish for choosing yourself. You are not cruel for setting a boundary. And you are not too old to start over. The applause was quiet at first, then grew. And in that sound, I heard something I'd waited my whole life to hear. Affirmation. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the State Council on Aging. The Hearth Foundation had been selected for a Community Service Award, recognized for exceptional grassroots impact on elder dignity and advocacy. I laughed when I read it. Carlton would have grinned and said, "About time someone saw what I've known all along. We didn't do it for awards." But I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good to be acknowledged. Not just by a plaque, but by progress. That December, Alyssa got married. It was a small ceremony, just the way she'd wanted. Held at the Botanical Garden. under a canopy of evergreens dusted with snow. She wore a simple ivory dress, and as she stood at the altar with her new husband, she looked over at me and smiled. "You ready, Grandma?" she whispered. I nodded, and I walked her down the aisle. Every step felt like reclaiming something I didn't know I'd lost: my presence, my worth, my right to be seen. After the ceremony, Marcus approached me, his hands shaking slightly. "You look strong up there," he said. "I am," I replied. He nodded. "I'm proud of you." I didn't say it back. Not because I wasn't proud of him, but because this moment wasn't about him. It was about me. A week before Christmas, Alyssa gifted me a bound journal, the cover embossed with the words, "Estelle's Fire, Stories from the Hearth." Inside were printed copies of all my speeches, quotes from our gatherings, and pages left blank. "For what's still to come," she wrote. I pressed the book to my chest and cried. Not from sorrow, but from fullness. I'm writing this now from the sunroom, the one Carlton always dreamed of building but never got to finish. I finally had it built this year: glass windows, warm floors, and a small bookshelf I'm slowly filling with our story. Because that's what this is, really. A story. One I never thought I'd tell. One I didn't know I needed to write. And if you're reading this, if you've ever felt invisible, discarded, too old to matter, I want you to know, you are not a burden. You are not used up. You are not too late. Sometimes, the greatest chapter of your life begins after the world thinks your story is done. Sometimes, the final act is where you finally step into the spotlight. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's the quiet fire inside you that burns the brightest. The story of Estelle Hammond offers a powerful reminder that self-worth has no expiration date. After a lifetime of giving, of being a dutiful mother, a supportive wife, and a silent provider, Estelle finds herself betrayed by the very people she nurtured. Yet instead of surrendering to bitterness or victimhood, she quietly reclaims her dignity, one decision at a time. Her journey shows that boundaries are not acts of selfishness. They are declarations of self-respect. For older adults, especially those who have spent years sacrificing for others, this story is a call to awaken. Your voice still matters, your needs are valid, and it is never too late to begin again. Estelle's strength lies not in confrontation, but in quiet courage, the kind that restores power through truth, not revenge. She doesn't burn bridges, she rebuilds herself. The lesson is clear. Aging does not mean fading. It can mean rising, choosing peace over pleasing, and legacy over silence. In a world that often overlooks the elderly, Estelle's story is a light, a testament that no matter how much time has passed, you still hold the pen to your own final chapter, and you can write it with clarity, dignity, and grace.